The morning sun cast long shadows across the African savanna as Kesi crouched beside the stream, her weathered hands cupping the precious water. She belonged to no single species that modern science could easily classify. Her brow was heavy like her Neanderthal cousins to the north, yet her limbs were long and graceful, like the people who would one day walk out of Africa. In her blood flowed the stories of a dozen different human lineages, each fighting for survival in a world that refused to be tamed. But Kesi didn't know she was living proof that everything we thought we knew about human evolution was wrong. She didn't know that her very existence shattered the neat, orderly timeline that scientists had carefully constructed. She only knew that survival meant adapting, and adaptation meant change. What she couldn't have imagined was that her DNA carried secrets that would revolutionize our understanding of what it truly means to be human. The sound of cracking branches made her freeze. Something large moved through the acacia trees, and in that moment of terror, Kesi's mind worked exactly like ours would. Fear, calculation, the desperate need to live another day. Yet the neural pathways firing in her brain were the product of not one evolutionary line, but a complex web of ancestry that spanned continents and millennia. She was the walking, breathing evidence that human evolution wasn't a ladder we climbed, but a tangled bush where branches split, merged, and split again. As she pressed herself against the rocky outcrop, her heart pounding, Kesi represented something far more profound than any textbook could capture. She was the child of chaos, the daughter of survival, the living embodiment of evolution's true nature, and her story begins to unravel everything we thought we knew about our own origins. The traditional view of human evolution reads like a simple fairy tale. First came the apes, then the early hominids shuffled out of the trees. Then came the various species of Australopithecus, followed by early Homo, then Neanderthals and Denisovans, and finally us, Homo sapiens, standing triumphant at the end of the line. It's clean, it's logical, and it's completely wrong. The reality that Kesi lived was far more complex, far more beautiful, and infinitely more dangerous. In her world, different human species didn't politely take turns existing. They collided, they competed, they survived together, and yes, they loved together. They created hybrid children who carried the strengths of multiple lineages, and sometimes the weaknesses too. Evolution wasn't a straight path from primitive to advanced. It was a raging river with countless tributaries, each carrying genetic treasures that would prove crucial to survival. 300 miles north of where Kesi gathered water, another drama was unfolding. Jorik, whose people had wandered down from the colder regions where ice still clung to the mountains, encountered something that would change both their peoples forever. His stocky frame and pale skin told the story of generations who had survived bitter winters, but his eyes held the same spark of curiosity that drove all human ancestors to explore, to discover, to survive. The meeting between Jorik's people and the local tribes wasn't marked by violence, as our modern minds might expect. Instead, it was marked by something far more revolutionary: recognition. They saw in each other not enemies to be destroyed, but potential partners in the great game of survival. Their children would carry the cold resistance genes of the north and the heat adaptation genes of the south. They would be stronger than either parent lineage alone. But survival in the Pleistocene world demanded more than just genetic diversity. It required innovation, cooperation, and the kind of creative thinking that could turn a simple stone into a life-saving tool. As Kesi and her mixed band of survivors faced the approaching dry season, they developed technologies that wouldn't be rediscovered for thousands of years. Their understanding of plant medicine, their sophisticated hunting strategies, their complex social structures, all emerged not from a single evolutionary line, but from the cross-pollination of different human groups. The evening fires brought the tribes together, and in the flickering light, stories were shared that carried more than entertainment. They carried genetic information, survival strategies, and the accumulated wisdom of multiple human lineages. An elder whose ancestry traced back to the robust Australopithecines shared knowledge of which roots could sustain life during famine. A young hunter, whose DNA carried traces of the earliest Homo erectus migrations, demonstrated spear-throwing techniques that had been refined across continents. This wasn't the primitive, brutish existence that popular imagination often depicts. This was a sophisticated network of human intelligence, each group contributing pieces to a survival puzzle that was far too complex for any single lineage to solve alone. The genetic mixing wasn't random chaos. It was evolution's greatest experiment in redundancy and resilience. As the seasons turned and the great migrations continued, the true genius of this tangled evolution became clear. When climate change struck, wiping out entire ecosystems, no single human species had all the tools needed for survival. But the hybrid populations, carrying genetic gifts from multiple ancestors, possessed an almost supernatural ability to adapt. They could survive the cold snaps that killed the heat-adapted populations, and they could endure the scorching droughts that defeated those specialized for cooler climates. Kesi's descendants would carry genes that allowed them to digest a wider variety of foods than any single lineage could manage. They would possess immune systems that had been tested against diseases from multiple continents. Their brains would integrate processing styles that had evolved in different environments, making them more creative, more adaptable, and ultimately more human. The archaeological evidence tells this story in fragments, but each fragment reveals another piece of the tangled truth. Stone tools found in sites separated by thousands of miles show identical techniques, suggesting not a linear progression of knowledge, but a complex web of communication and learning. Genetic studies reveal that our modern DNA carries traces of at least 4 major human lineages, some of which we haven't even discovered yet. But perhaps the most profound discovery is what this tangle means for understanding ourselves. We are not the culmination of a single evolutionary success story. We are the product of evolution's greatest collaboration. Every human alive today carries the survival victories of dozens of different human populations. The anxiety you feel in the dark comes from ancestors who survived night predators. Your ability to read facial expressions was refined by people who needed to quickly distinguish friend from foe. Your capacity for language emerged from groups who discovered that cooperation was more powerful than competition. The morning sun that now rises over modern cities carries the same light that illuminated Kesi's world. But where she saw immediate survival challenges, we can now see the deeper truth. Human evolution wasn't a ladder that we climbed step by step. It was a vast web of survival, innovation, and genetic exchange that created something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. A species that could adapt not just to any environment, but to environments that didn't even exist yet. In her final years, Kesi would have watched her grandchildren playing by the same stream where she once feared for her life. These children carried genes from ancestors she could never have imagined, and they possessed capabilities that would have seemed magical to earlier generations. They could communicate across vast distances, manipulate their environment in ways that bordered on the supernatural, and most remarkably, they could imagine futures that had never existed. The tangled nature of human evolution didn't make us weaker or more confused. It made us the most adaptable, most resilient, and most creative species that had ever existed. Every challenge we face today, from climate change to technological disruption, we face with brains that were forged in the crucible of evolutionary chaos. We are not the products of a simple, linear progression. We are the children of complexity, the heirs to a genetic revolution that turned survival from a solo game into a collaborative masterpiece. The stream where Kesi once knelt still flows today, carrying water that has witnessed the entire story of human evolution. But now we understand that story not as a straight line from primitive to advanced, but as a magnificent tangle of survival, adaptation, and hope. We are all the children of that tangle, carrying within us the genetic wisdom of countless ancestors who faced impossible odds and found ways to thrive. The next time you look in the mirror, remember that you're not seeing the end result of a simple evolutionary timeline. You're seeing the product of evolution's greatest experiment in cooperation and survival. You're seeing proof that chaos, when guided by the relentless drive to survive and thrive, can create something more beautiful and more resilient than any orderly progression ever could. And somewhere, in the deepest parts of your DNA, Kesi's story continues, carrying forward the tangled truth of human evolution into whatever challenges and wonders the future holds.